Tonight's book report is brought to you by Fish Foods, the manufacturer of Vegemite. Spread smooth, doesn't taste fishy.
Good evening. I thought it was about time that YouTube got some class. So I've decided to do a book review. This will be my first one. There may be more to follow, depending on how classy people want YouTube to be. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Now, I'm not going to review the Grimm's fairy tale, Grimm Brothers, Hansel and Gretel, because I believe that's true to the original story. I'm talking about the Disney version. Yes, the Disney version. Now this has all been blown up into two goody-goody kids come across a wicked witch and they dispatch it. Now, that is not actually the case. The story starts with Hansel and Gretel playing around. The mother's hard working in her kitchen and the lounge room and cleaning up the dust and mopping and cooking and that. When in comes Hansel and Gretel with a donkey. Now these two children brought the donkey into the kitchen. Now, instead of the mother doing what they would have done in those days and put her over her knee and gave them a good spanking, she actually told them to go out into the forest and collect some berries. You know, what sort of a punishment's that? Hey, you flaming. Anyway, so off they go. Now, Gretel decides that she is going to coerce Hansel into going deep into the forest. Now, we all know boys and men will follow women anywhere just for a glimpse of a knicker or something like that. Now, they weren't, I must say, they weren't brother and sister, they were step brother and sister, so that's okay, I think. Yeah, probably. Right, so off they go into the deep forest. Now, why would anybody carry a half a loaf of bread with them when they're going in to collect berries? Don't ask me, don't want to know about it. It's just a stupid premise to a story. Anyway, so they wouldn't get lost, Hansel starts throwing little breadcrumbs along the path. Now, birds being birds, they decide they're going to eat them. Now, don't feed wild birds bread. I'll tell you what's going to happen to these birds. They pecked all the bread. Now, this is not in the story, I just know this from a zoological point of view, that the birds come down and they picked up all the bread and ate it, and they got constipated. And when the birds get constipated, they blow up and they become aerodynamically unstable, and they're flying along, and all of a sudden, and down into the dirt they go, beak first. So all you've got are all these little birds with their bums in the air and their beaks stuck in the ground. Now that's not right. Don't do it. Don't feed them bread. Anyway, I'll get on. So they're wandering through there and they come across this beautiful house. Now, this beautiful house is made of gingerbread and candy and toffee and all sorts of other stuff and chocolate. And they thought, wow, this is great. Now, it's just a kind old lady, just an old lady living there by herself. And it mustn't rain there, because if it rained, that gingerbread house just would have turned to mush. So I can't see the point in anybody building a house out of gingerbread. But anyway, so the two kids, instead of knocking politely on the door, what do? They start eating the house. Now this poor old lady, all by herself in the middle of the forest, tetched in the head because she's built it out of gingerbread and toffee and stuff. She's sitting in there, happily knitting away, doing what old ladies do best. And she hears chomp, 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 chomp. So she goes out, and there's these two little children eating a house. Now, what's an old lady to do? So she invites them in to feed them. She obviously thinks they're hungry. So she sits them down at the table. And Hansel starts running around because he's all hyped up on the sugar from the gingerbread and the toffee and the candy. And then Gretel decides she's going to start banging on the... So the old lady, for their protection, puts them in a cage for their own protection whilst she figures out what she's going to do with them, try and find where they live. So she starts to look through the yellow pages for lost children, and she can't find that. So she goes over, and and it's a nice warm house. It is when it starts a fire up, and it was getting cool. So she lights a fire in her stove place. Now, it's not a stove as the story might say, because they had open fireplaces in those days, and the stove with the pot on the thing and the little tripod handles, and the smoke went up to who's it. Yeah, anyway, she lets them out with the intention of feeding them nice warm soup. So what do? They kick her in the fire. Lovely. These two children decide to kick her in the fire, and she goes up and flames up the chimney. Well, I think that's disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. And Disney portrayed this poor little old tetched lady who's got a gingerbread house that's going to melt as soon as it rains as a witch. Now I ask you, do you think that's obviously a witch? No. Well, that's my review of Hansel and Gretel and what they did to that poor little old lady's house. And as far as I'm concerned, Hansel and Gretel can go suck an egg. Thank you.